What's going on, guys? I'm just sitting here working on Fenlock, which is the capital city of Fenlore. And I thought I'd turn my camera on, as we do. So Fenlock's a pretty fun little project that I've been working on because I put a lot more stake into characters than I do settings. And I didn't ever really start drawing settings until I made the decision to put my artwork in my books. All of my characters in the novels, they come from characters that I drew up out of boredom, so it's definitely my characters feed my narrative when I'm writing, but for my settings, most of the time I am drawing my setting pieces off of something that I have previously written. It's just, this isn't something that I would be naturally drawn towards drawing. It's just not something that I typically do, which has been really fun. I don't do a whole lot of cityscapes. I'm dealing with perspective when I am, dealing a lot more with ambient light versus direct light. So it's just been fun. Fenlock, does reflect kind of the most modern aspect of this specific setting. So we're getting kind of probably like most of the inspirations I'm drawing towards, and like my reference photos are from 1650s to 1700s, like Europe. I did a lot of Google searches on London and the different cathedrals you would have seen at the time. And in the book, Fenlock is kind of described through being able to see the many different years that it stood in just the architecture in the city, which is kind of fun because, the way that the history of Fenlock is very much seen on the buildings itself. So we have the spire, which is, the center of Fenlock. It's ancient. It's described in my world as being thousands of years old, which is interesting because Fenelore, the whole country of Fenelore is a pretty new country. It's only been around for about 300 years, and the capital city, Fenlock, has obviously only been around for that long. So this city itself was long ago home of another great nation, and when Ilivara led her rebellion and took over the city, we learn about all of this in the book. She renamed it, took this as her capital, and now it is the capital city of Fenlore. So we have the more ancient structure, which is the spire that existed for, like I said, millennia. And then as we kind of move away from the spire, the buildings get significantly more modern. And, all of these rings in the city are since the inception of Fenelore. These are all relatively new construction, whereas the buildings on the upper plateau, which is where the city was relegated to before the formation of Fenelore and Fenlock as a city, are all going to be much older. It's been a little bit difficult for me as the artist to kind of figure out how and what I wanted to show. I'm putting this piece in my book, and I'm trying, it took a little bit of intentionality for me to decide what specifically I wanted to go in the book. Do I want to show the entirety of Fenlock? Because there is a lot of buildings that obviously we're not seeing over here that you'll have to get from the description of the book. And ultimately I decided to do this because I think that this part of Fenlock is more indicative of the culture that we find ourselves in as the story is progressing. So like I said, my books are, at their core, they are flintlock fantasy, and I don't want to confuse my reader too much because we have a lot of sword play. Our main character Thenric, he uses a broadsword in a flintlock fantasy, which again can be kind of confusing, especially since we start our narrative kind of on the horizon of this new industrial age. So all of our characters aren't necessarily spun up on what even a rifle or a pistol is. It's completely new to them. So we explore all of the different ways that innovation kind of changes our setting, which is ultimately something that I really, really was excited to do because, you know, it's interesting having setting like in history be a conflict for our main character, you know, having to adapt to these new ways, you know. I'm rambling right now, just as I draw. When I turn my camera on for these drawing sessions, this is like not something that I'm putting too much intentionality in my speech, which I don't know, maybe you guys enjoy that. It certainly displays some level of authenticity. I never really considered myself to be a good talker. I'm a much better writer, but now I have a YouTube channel, so I have to, you know, I have to talk. Or just do time lapses of my drawings, which is what people have told me to do, and I have a tripod now. I have a tripod, which is gonna make this a whole lot easier, and I've said it previously on one of my videos, but like it's kind of hard for me to do a time lapse just because this piece that I've been working on right now, like this is the first time that I've sat in my office and worked on it. I've mostly been doing it in, you know, just my idle times at work. So, you know, again, it's just huge gaps that you would be missing if I were to only turn on my camera and do time lapses for when I'm sitting here in my office drawing. I've thought about also doing like a dedicated office piece, like just having a piece that's the piece that I work on when I do my videos, and that is probably what I am going to do. It's just that right now I've got to meet all these self-imposed deadlines for these books. So I don't really have time to work on anything that is not going into these books. I'm almost done with all of them though, so as soon as I do get them finished, that's probably when I'll start doing something like that. Also, I typically once a month, I do a single point, like a drawing study where I do an entire piece and I'm not allowed to put down my pen, which is, you know, it's a fun little drawing study for me because that's just not how I typically operate. It forces me to be a little bit more sloppy and accept some of the mistakes that I typically wouldn't accept with my more refined pieces. So maybe I'll just turn the camera on for that and I'll just do a time lapse of it. I don't know. But yeah, so this is my cityscape. It's also a little bit difficult because like I was trying to decide how much detail I wanted to add to this cityscape under the understanding that, you know, I'm working on just like a normal piece of paper, and this is probably, the piece itself is going to be shrunken down to about 2/3 size, which is fine ultimately. It's much easier to shrink a piece than it is to like blow up a piece, but a lot of this I anticipate getting washed out for print. I'm not really going to know until I make it smaller, but you know, because of that, like it was a little bit of a struggle for me to decide how much detail I wanted to add to kind of once we get past the second and third wall. So yeah, and again, I don't have a crazy amount of experience with cityscapes either, so ultimately this has been a super fun process. You're seeing a lot more hard lines than I typically put in my my portraits and my character art, or even a lot of my setting art, just because I do need to kind of exaggerate so that you don't lose the form of a lot of the more prominent buildings, like, you know, the cathedral right here, or the university here, the mansion here. And it's been fun because, you know, like I've said, for those of you who enjoy watching my videos, all 100 of you, I like to hide Easter eggs within, you know, my world. So we have all of the people down here. We have the Traders Union, the Union headquarters, and we have this kind of path right here that leads to the upper part of the plateau. And it's interesting because within my world, it's all dwarven architecture. Oh man, I can't wait to talk about the dwarves for you guys. I love the dwarves in my world. No, I'm not going to do it now. I'm going to do it for another video, but the upper part of the plateau has a lot of dwarven architecture from a time in a period of history where the dwarves were slaves. And, you know, it was an entire race of people. Well, actually, most of the race of people. There were still some free dwarves, but we'll talk about that later. That were forced by the tyrant king of Mekthar, which is, again, that is the kingdom that existed many kingdoms ago. Not even the most previous kingdom that inhabited this kind of area of the map. But anyway, I digress. This is currently, as it stands within the setting of my story, this is Fenlock, the capital of Fenlore, and I am working on it. Probably got another, I don't know, with how this piece is going, probably 2 hours of work on it, maybe a little bit more. But yeah, it's been fun, you know, cityscaping. It's not something that I usually do, so thanks for tuning in.